Good afternoon, and welcome to the Wednesday afternoon conference call with Trusts Unlimited. This is Jim George speaking. I'm the non-attorney spokesman and facilitator for Trusts Unlimited, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this call, particularly those of you calling in for the first time and those that will be listening to the replay over the next 24 to 48 hours. Though we haven't done this in the past, I want to go ahead and just suggest that those of you listening for the first time, if you like the things you've heard, please hit the subscribe button. And if you'd be kind enough, please share this information with other individuals that you think might find it of interest. This is going to be a very different call today. I got up early this morning, had something on my mind, decided I needed to share some things with you. I'm in my home office today, and I went in there and started going into my file, digging into things to try to find what I needed, and fortunately I was able to locate it. So we're going to have a little bit different agenda today. Again, for our newer callers, to get a complete bumper-to-bumper description of the turnkey program we've put in place for Dinarians, I suggest you go to our call of February 15th. We are going to touch on those issues today, but in a larger sense, I want to talk about the situation that we all face as American citizens and how we can circumvent what I consider to be the high surveillance, high tax, and confiscatory government that we're confronted with these days. So I'm going to touch on a few things. I'm going to touch on the progress in Iraq with regard to the reinstitution of their currency, which in my opinion could literally occur at any time. I want to talk about the unparalleled benefits that our Family Asset Protection Trust package can provide, benefits which no other entity domestically can provide. And this is where we're going in a little different direction. I'm really going to review the criminal history of the central banking system. And that's right, you heard me right. In my opinion, it's a criminal history. And then lastly, I want to touch on the implications of Biden's Executive Order 14067, which is the creation of the central bank digital currency. So again, if you like the things we're discussing, I hope you'll hit the subscribe button. And beyond that, if you're kind enough to share these calls with other individuals, we'd be greatly appreciative. So let's start and talk a little bit about what's going on in Iraq. And let's start with the CBI. This is going to be short today because it's good information and there's no reason to prolong the discussion. The CBI is officially in the position and in the process of retiring the U.S. dollar in country and placing the dinar as the currency to be used in country for the exchange of goods and services. Now, there's been a three-pronged approach to getting to this position. Phase one, I like to refer to it monetary reform. This was basically beginning to depeg from the U.S. dollar, building up their U.S. dollar reserves to back their own currency, and substantial purchases of gold. Phase two, which is their transition to a private, diverse economy to rebuild their infrastructure and their grid, primarily by consummating international contracts to do so. And phase three, to strengthen the IQD, to finish the reforms, eliminate all of the corruption. Now, to accomplish all three of these things, the monetary reform, the economic reform, and the currency reform, all of this is being done for one reason and one reason only: to reinstate their currency, to float it on the Forex, and to revalue the currency globally. Lastly, in my opinion, the currency reform, and I've repeated this before, is not linked to the budget. In other words, in a perfect world, if they were to reinstitute in country, then utilize that rate in their budget, they would still change the rate once again once they revalued globally. So, in my opinion, the two are not linked to one another. The budget will be passed and the rate will be what the rate is, and the CBI will move to change the exchange rate, and when they do, they will accommodate this in their budget. In addition, with nearly $100 trillion in U.S. dollar reserves. If necessary, they can function with the U.S. dollar, at least the government can, whether the transactions between private citizens are dinar or not. As the dinar increases in value, the government can still utilize the U.S. dollar. So this is why I don't think that the passage of the budget and the reinstitution of the dinar have to be linked. So that being the case, there's really nothing more to say. We continue to move in the right direction. A couple of other things I'd like to point out as well. Iraq banking system is not only utilizing the dinar in country for certain purchases, but they're also being linked to both the Buna and the SWIFT system. This is being done for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, to limit and stop all of the smuggling. But second, because they're going to need to be linked to both the Buna and the SWIFT system when they reinstitute and then revalue their currency. So the mere fact that they are moving to the Buna and the SWIFT system tells you in and of itself that they cannot operate in a program rate. The other issue is the CBI's discussions about the de-dollarization. Now, this again has to do in country. The banks in country are now accepting multiple currencies, and the IQD, because it's depegged from the dollar, is floating against those other currencies. Now, when the dinar was pegged to the dollar, it moved along with the dollar as the dollar was against these other currencies. But now that they're depegged from the dollar, the IQD is going to be able to float against these other currencies without its relationship to the dollar or being pegged to the dollar. Lastly, the IQD, according to Dubai, is going to be very shortly in the IMF basket of currencies. Once again, there's absolutely no reason for that to be the case unless they anticipate the reinstitution coming out of the program rate and then floating it on the Forex internationally. So everything's moving in the right direction, and that's why, in my opinion, the reinstitution of the Iraqi dinar in country could literally happen at any time. Now, I want to move on to the next topic, which is what I like to refer to as the unparalleled benefits of our Family Asset Protection Trust package. And I want to talk about this as we have done in the past, primarily in terms of those of us that hold dinar and other pre-valued currencies. But given the current situation in this country, why every American needs to establish our Family Asset Protection Trust package. So first, by establishing this package as a dinarian, you're going to preserve your privacy and your anonymity. When you acquire this newfound wealth, you're going to be in a much better position to make decisions for yourself when that's known only to you and the people that are involved in your trust package. But for those of you that are not dinarians that are of substantial wealth, or those of you that are very unhappy about the control mechanisms being instituted by our government, this trust package will be beneficial. Second, by establishing this package as a dinarian, you are going to avoid personal IRS scrutiny because the taxable event will occur within the trust. This also is helpful to all American citizens who want to minimize tax exposure, and there are things that can be done in trust to defer taxes that cannot be done outside of the trust. Third, this trust package has a special gift subtrust. Now, if you're gifting currencies to family and friends, and you have no problem giving them the currency to exchange for themselves or giving them the post-RV USD after the exchange, that can be done outside of the trust. But if you want to control the post-RV proceeds, that can be done within this special gift subtrust in the package. But any American citizen of any means who would like to assist friends and family members but not outright gifts to them can allow them access to things that are owned by the trust. So that's another benefit whether you're a dinarian or not. Fourth, by establishing this trust, a state will avoid the cost and delay of probate and the federal estate tax. And the federal estate tax, beyond the approximate $10 million exemption can be as high as 65%. But by establishing this trust, again, you'll not only avoid the cost and delay of probate, but the federal estate tax will be zero. And lastly, this trust provides specific asset protection benefits both pre- and post-RV, whether you're a Dinarian or not. So I strongly suggest any American citizen who wants to protect their privacy, their anonymity, their wealth, and legitimately reduce taxation should establish this trust package. Now, I'm going to get into, as I said, the history. And let me pull up my pages here. I've got stuff strewn all over the place. Yeah, I want now to get into the history of the central bank, and I call it the criminal history. And after I go through this history, I think you're going to agree with me. I got up early this morning. I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about this. I'm in my home office right now, and my wife came in and said, I tore the room up. She said, Jim, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for something. I'm looking for this history of the central bank. I think it's time to really discuss this so that people fully understand what's going on, and by doing so, fully understand why they need to establish their family asset protection trust package. So let's go ahead and get started with this history of the central bank system. And we have to start with the Rothschild family because this is where it begins. I would suggest you go back and Google the Rothschild family history because it's very interesting, it's very enlightening, and frankly, it's in my view, it's frightening. Well, we have to go all the way back to 1604. That's over 400 years ago. The Rothschilds, along with the Dutch House of Orange, that's the royal family of the Dutch, founded the first Bank of Amsterdam, again in 1604, which was the first central bank ever established, and they instituted something called fractional banking. So right there, you need to Google the Rothschilds, and you need to Google fractional banking to understand what's going on here. 1694, William of Orange, that's from the House of Orange, married into the House of Windsor, which of course is the royal family of England. What did they do then? They established the Bank of England and of course the Central Bank of London. The Rothschilds for the last 400 years have been the financiers of wars on both sides. It's an interesting family. They're devout followers of Kabbalah, which is a form of Jewish mysticism. That's something else you may want to Google, Kabbalah. They financed the Rothschilds, for example, financed the Chinese opium trade. They financed the African slave trades. They financed the German Hessians, which supported the British in the Revolutionary War. And just to prove to you that they have worked with both sides, after assisting the British by providing the German Hessians in the Revolutionary War, and having lost the Revolutionary War, they turned right around and financed the Louisiana Purchase for the newly formed country. So they're not non-political, they're not apolitical, they're just amoral, and they just go wherever they can make a buck. The Rothschilds' history in the United States, let's get a little bit more specific. 1791 was the establishment of the first central bank of the United States, basically as part of the resolution of the Revolutionary War. And it was established through their agent, who was Alexander Hamilton, secretary in the cabinet of George Washington. So a cabinet member of the first cabinet of the United States was basically the individual who helped negotiate the establishment of the first central bank of the United States. Now, central banks at the time were licensed and had to be renewed every 20 years. Well, 20 years later, the United States of America did not like the central bank system, so they failed to renew the Central Bank of London. Now, that was 1811. Well, what happened in 1812? We had the War of 1812. Now, many of us think, who have a cursory understanding of history, the British regrouped. They decided they were not going to let the colony of the United States disappear. They were going to regain that colony. But basically, it was about money. When we ended the central bank system, they lost a lot of money. And it was M.A. Rothschild who said, we're going to teach those impudent Americans a lesson and bring them back to colonial status. While at the same time, as I said, they're funding both sides. They're making money both ways. However, we evidently didn't learn our lesson. In 1816, the Congress that was in debt as the result of the War of 1812, funded by who? The Rothschild family, was forced to establish a second central bank, Rothschild Central Bank. Once again, licensed for 20 years. Let's move to 1832. The seventh president, Andrew Jackson, ran on a platform of ending the central bank in 1836, which would be 20 years later. As he ran for president, his slogan was, "Vote Jackson and no central bank." What happened? Well, in 1835, someone tried to assassinate Jackson. As a matter of fact, there were two assassins. They had him at point-blank range. They fired their weapons, and both weapons misfired. So that's how close we came to having that central bank renewed. So from 1836 to 1913, we had no central bank. However, in 1841, they tried once again to reestablish the Rothschild Central Bank in America, but the 10th president, John Tyler, vetoed a bill to renew that bank. He received multiple death threats. He had to have extra security, and he had death threats for the rest of his life. Let's move to 1862. The 16th president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, rejected the establishment of a Rothschild Central Bank. As a result, the bank said, we will assist you in the Civil War. You need to borrow money in order to defend the Union. We will lend you money between 24 and 36%, which was, of course, usury at the time. But Lincoln knew, pursuant to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the United States could coin its own currency. So pursuant to Article 1, Section 8, Lincoln proceeded to print $500 million in legal tender. The result, Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. Now, certainly the Civil War, the ending of the Civil War, the ending of slavery was impetus for John Wilkes Booth. But it cannot be denied that the central bank had to be somewhat involved in that because it's just too coincidental. Let's move to 1881. The 20th president of the United States, James Garfield, condemned the attempt to establish a central bank and said he would veto any legislation to renew the central bank. He was assassinated. Let's move to 1913. Woodrow Wilson. Finally, the central bank was reestablished pursuant to the 16th Amendment, which created not only the Federal Reserve, but the federal income tax. The federal income tax was necessary to pay for the money that they were borrowing from the Federal Reserve. Why did we need a Federal Reserve where we could print our own money? Well, most likely because Woodrow Wilson was a globalist, and the globalist movement goes back much further than you think, and he knew that this would further the globalist ends. 1917, the Rothschilds ordered the assassination of Tsar Nicholas II and his family. Now, this was the result of the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolsheviks were a tool of the central bank. They were funded by the central bank. Tsar Nicholas II had already abdicated the throne, yet they still ordered his assassination along with his family. It was a revenge killing. Why? Because it was Tsar Nicholas that blocked the Rothschilds' attempt to create a one world order at the convention of the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Yes, the one world order nonsense goes back over 200 years. It was also the end of Tsar Alexander II, who assisted Lincoln in the Civil War, helped to finance that against the central bank that was financing the South. But here is the problem with the central bank system. As I've said in the past, they called it the Federal Reserve in order to sort of obscure what was really going on. It's not a federal agency. It's a private entity run by the central bank, global central bank system, and there is no reserve. They simply print money from nothing, and they basically rent it to the federal government, who collects the rent from the citizens of the country. But in 1927, we saw passage of something called the McFadden Act. The McFadden Act rechartered our central bank system into perpetuity, meaning the government was no longer every 20 years required to audit the Federal Reserve and re-up the thing. It's established into perpetuity, so the only way to end it would probably be either by 2/3 vote from the Congress or an Article 5 convention. But there's one more important date. June 4th, 1963, JFK signed Executive Order 11110, returning power of the United States government to issue its own currency, again, pursuant to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. What was the result? 5 months later, JFK was assassinated. So, let's review. Actually, before the review, one other thing. We have one other president who's been involved in, at the very least, trying to warn everyone about the central bank, and his name's Donald Trump. He opposed the central bank system. He unfortunately never explained it. He spoke in rather cryptic terms when he would talk about we were going to create an economy that people have never seen. He's specifically referring to ending the Federal Reserve Bank. Donald Trump was not loathed because of his tweets, although they weren't helpful. Donald Trump was loathed from the day he came down the elevator because he said his mentor was Andrew Jackson, who ended that first central bank, and because he planned on doing the same thing. So let's look back at the history. President Andrew Jackson, John Taylor, Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, John F. Kennedy, and Donald Trump. Every one of those presidents was either assassinated, suffered an assassination attempt, or was removed from office. And they all have one thing in common: their opposition to the central bank system. One other thing I'll point out. There are 5 countries that are not part of the Rothschild central bank system: China, Russia, Iran, Syria, and North Korea. Now, what do they all have in common? They're tyrannical regimes. It's much easier to manipulate a democracy or a republic such as ours rather than an authoritarian or totalitarian state. And so these countries have slipped through their fingers. One other thing I'll mention. We had the removal of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and we had the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya over the last 20 years. Is it a coincidence that both of these individuals were leaving the central bank system and creating their own gold-backed currency? So the reason I've discussed this history is so you understand exactly what's going on, so that I can explain to you how, to the best of our ability, we can circumvent ourselves from this system. One other thing I need to mention, that is Executive Order, Joe Biden's Executive Order 14067, to begin the implementation of a central bank digital currency. The central bank digital currency is absolute and complete control of the citizens. It's a transition that is already underway. We are told that it will make this currency, our currency, safe and liquid. That's not true. We know that government agencies are routinely hacked, so a digital currency is not safe. We also know that any world war, and people are afraid of nuclear wars, but there's a much more likely scenario, and that is the first salvo being something called an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse weapon. What's that do? It wipes out all digital information. It shuts the country down. We're back in the Stone Age in a matter of moments. But of course, what goes with it, besides our ability to communicate, our ability to transact, our ability to travel, all of that, our wealth is gone. It's obliterated by the EMP. But there's more to it. Why would they even want to institute a digital currency with risk like that out there? It's because the digital currency gives control of your currency, not ownership, but control of the currency to the Treasury. Because there's only two things you can do with a digital currency. You can leave it in the possession of the Treasury, or you can exchange it for a good or a service. But what happens if the government disapproves of the things you say and do? What happens if they disapprove of the purchases? What happens if they don't want you to purchase an AR-15? Or what happens if you haven't satisfied their credits for fossil fuels and things of that nature? Well, they could shut down or confiscate the currency, can't they? They often talk about they like the Chinese social credit score system, and that's exactly what they're doing. That's what the digital currency is, phase one of that system. I'll give you one other example of something they're trying to phase in. What they want, the federal government, is to centralize education and have complete control of the narrative. How do you do that? You do that by making all education, quote-unquote, free. Of course, taxpayer funded. It's not free. What that means is the government's in control. What's the first thing they need to do? They need to get rid of the private student loans and make all the loans for students government loans. Then what do? Then they forgive the student loan. Then the next step is let's just make it all free. Because you're right. It's not fair that people that pay off their loans have to now pay taxes to pay off the loans for everyone else. So let's just get rid of it and make education free. This is what they're doing. Now I want to talk about how we can circumvent all of that. And that is through the establishment of your package, family package of irrevocable trusts. Again, by establishing this package, you preserve your privacy and your anonymity. You transfer all the taxation to the trust. You have certain tax-sheltered advantages in the trust that you don't have outside of the trust. It's also much more difficult whether you're involved in civil proceedings, criminal investigations, or IRS audits. It's much more difficult for them to circumvent your rights. Well, what are these rights? Well, the first right is your right to contract, pursuant to Section 10, Article 1, Section 10 of the, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 of the Constitution. Quote, there shall be no law impairing the obligation of contracts or any grant, title, or nobility. That means that we're all commoners. We have no nobility. We have no elite class, and that we all have the right to institute contracts to do business with others. Now, what's a trust? A trust is a contract. You establish a contract to protect yourself and your family, your privacy, and your wealth. And that's also pursuant to the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, your right to privacy. Quote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons and things to be searched. What's this mean? It means that in order to pierce that trust, they have to go to a court with affidavits from individuals to show that you've perpetrated a fraud or broken a law. They can't just kick your door down looking for a crime. They have to establish in a court that there's probable cause that a crime has been committed. And this is why you need to establish this trust, whether you're a dinarian or not. Now, for those of you who are holders of our trust and have dinar and have listened to our call, you know the things that will be discussed in the call that we suggest everyone go and listen to from February 15th. But I want to explain to those of you that are not dinarians a little bit about this trust. This trust was the simplification of a rather sophisticated trust package that we've utilized in the past for our more affluent clients, a package that had an initial cost of anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000. But when we started to market to dinarians, we knew that this price tag was going to be unaffordable for too many, because many dinarians are just hardworking middle-class people who, for the first time in their life, are going to have to arduous task of having to deal with a rather substantial amount of wealth literally overnight. So by simplifying this package, we've been able to reduce the cost to $3,000. There are several ways you can pay for that. If you pay us up front, we'll discount the price further to $2,500, saving you an additional $500. Now remember, this is a trust package that we routinely sell for $10,000, but it's available to you for $2,500. But those of you that are not dinarians and have had an opportunity to listen to this call, if you contact us and simply say that you learned of this through our call, you'll have the availability of this trust package as well. Now, if you can't afford the $2,500, we have a deferred payment arrangement. You'd make an initial payment of $525, which sum would basically offset our out-of-pocket costs just to produce and deliver your trust package to you. The balance of the $3,000 would then be paid in $100 monthly installments. We will charge no interest. The only proviso is for those of you that are dinarians that once the dinar revalues, any unpaid balance would need to be paid within 30 days. So with this approach, anyone that has currencies and understands the need for getting their affairs in order, protecting their wealth from an intrusive federal government, should be in a position to afford to do so. One other suggestion, we do accept credit cards. Pay us up front with a credit card. Not only will you get the $500 discount, but the minimum payment on your card would be substantially less than the $100 a month you'd pay under our deferred payment arrangement. But we will work with you in whatever method works best for you. Our objective is to help you get your affairs in order and your trust in place for all of the reasons that we've discussed here on this call. I want to mention one other thing, and it's this. The establishment of this trust is designed primarily to exempt you from the potential of civil litigation. And the way this is done is by transferring assets to the trust. It's when you hold assets in direct title that you can lose control of them. And it's at precisely those times in life that you need and want control. If you've lived for any length of time you either experienced in your own life or through friends and family, things like unexpected divorce, permanent incapacitation, the onset of dementia, premature death, and prolonged and complicated probate processes. Then there are, of course, business losses, personal investment losses, and even bankruptcies. The number 2 loss of wealth now in the aggregate, courtesy of the information age, is identity theft. But the number 1 loss of personal wealth remains confiscation through civil litigation. Anything you own in direct title can be taken from you. So in point of fact, the only way that you can manage, protect, and control everything at all times and in all circumstances, particularly with the establishment of this central bank digital currency, increased taxation, and increased surveillance, is through the establishment of your family package of irrevocable trusts. And add to that those of you that hold currencies and are anticipating a substantial increase in value. We at Trust Unlimited will do everything we can to help you accomplish your personal and financial objectives, whether you're a dinarian or whether you're simply an American citizen who wants to exercise their constitutional rights to keep their personal affairs private and protect themselves, again, from civil litigation and unwanted intrusion from the federal government. Now, I am going to go ahead and open the Q&A. I'm going to give you our contact information as I do. And I'd like to give you our contact information. For those of you, whether you're dinarians or not, I strongly suggest if you are interested in the things we've discussed here, you can contact us to get our initial no-obligation package. It does contain everything you need if you wish to proceed with the establishment of a family asset protection trust. But again, you're under absolutely no obligation to do so. The package has a lot of information about us, about trusts, about the currencies, and the things we've discussed here today. You can review the package, contact us if you have any questions. There will be no consultation fee. You can go to our website, which is trusts with an S, unlimitedllc.com. If you wish to order our initial no-obligation package, you can do so either by email or phone. Our email address is trusts with an S, unlimitedllc@gmail.com. And our phone service is 307-274-4122. Contact us. We'll get our initial package out to you right away. You can review the package. Again, everything you need is there. If you wish to proceed, you can contact us if you have any questions. So let's go to the Q&A here. Our first caller is area code 813. That's 813. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple questions, but first and foremost, I understand the difference between an irrevocable trust and a revocable trust, but how do you make changes to an irrevocable trust if you didn't anticipate all the options up front or your situation changed or whatever? How do you make changes to an irrevocable trust?
Okay. Now, here's where the confusion is. There are essentially 2 types of irrevocable trust. One is an institutional trust, and one is a self-settled irrevocable trust. An institutional irrevocable trust is when you go to a bank or a brokerage firm or a trust company, you utilize their trust, naming them as the trustee. By doing that, you are locked into their trust, their terms, and them as trustee. Our trust is a self-settled irrevocable trust, meaning you're exercising your constitutional right to contract. You've created a private trust. You select your trustee. You select the terms of the trust. You can amend the terms of the trust at any time. You can replace the trustee at any time. You can place assets in the trust at any time, and you can disgorge or remove assets from the trust at any time. That's the difference between ours, which is a self-settled trust, and the classic institutional trust, which many people confuse as the only type of irrevocable trust.
Great. Thank you very much. There's a lot of questions about taxes when the RV happens. You went through, I know from your calls, you went through this with the RV back in the 90s with Kuwait. What was it? How was that taxed? Is it long-term
Well,
capital gains?
unfortunate. Well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news for me was 4 months after I purchased the Kuwaiti dinar, I exchanged it, which meant it was ordinary income. So the tax issue was never a factor back then. Now the issue is a little more clouded. We have IRS section 98082, which refers to the profit from the exchange as cap gain. That suggests that it's a capital asset if the profit is capital gain. Section 643A and B of the code suggests that the exchange of a capital asset within an irrevocable trust is tax deferred. However, that is our reading of 643A and B. We want the IRS to confirm the tax deferral. But the worst case scenario is that it's cap gain. Here's also the catch. Most people understand a capital gain tax to be assessed when you sell or exchange the asset. However, 988E2 says that if the profit from the exchange exceeds $200, you must pay the tax. But it does not say if the profit that you would realize from the exchange, meaning further that if you would make a $200 profit or more when you go to exchange, the tax is due now. In other words, the taxable event is profit in the excess of $200, not when you actually execute the exchange for the profit. That's where people get tripped up. And that's why I always say we want to see the reval in the first half of a quarter, if at all possible, because that gives us time to hold the currency before the tax would be due 6 to 8 weeks later. But if the exchange were to happen, for example, like we're entering March, after March 15th, I don't want to see an exchange until April, because if it pops on March 21st, taxes are due in 3 weeks. That doesn't give us time to get the IRS to, confirm what the exact tax implications are. I know that's kind of long-winded, but, it's a complicated situation.
Last quick question. What's the quantum financial system? How does it factor in, if at all, into this RV? Is it?
It doesn't at all. And all of these things that they're doing are just mechanisms for global control. We're going to be part of the system. We're told if you talk about Nazara, Jazara, the quantum system, all we hear about is how good it's going to be for us. It's all centralizes things. So, it is what it is. We're going to have to be exposed to it to a certain extent. But what we're going to concentrate, at least what I'm going to concentrate on, is moving assets to the tangible arena that gives them much less control. When we're in the financial and currency arena, we're going to, of course, exchange currency, and the wealth is going to come from the currency, but then that currency is going to be controlled. So we want to transition to tangible assets to the extent possible to minimize control of the currency.
Okay, yeah, I just hear so much about QFS, and they keep talking that they're hand in glove as far as the reval is part of the QSF or vice versa, and that's the reason I asked the question. Thank you very much.
Certainly. Okay, our next caller is area code 832. That's 832. Go ahead.
Hi, Jim. I just think you answered my question that I had, but I wanted some clarification, and that was if there's an RV before the end of March, are you saying you still may have to pay taxes even if you don't exchange it prior to March?
That's what 988E2 says. And again, that's why I want to see the reval early in a quarter so we can hold the currency if it comes out of the low float, and it'll give us time to compel the IRS to give us confirmation of how to read 988E2 and 643A and B. And that's also why if we hit March 15th, I don't want to see it before April 1st.
Right, I got that. One more quick question. A lot of us, let's just say it comes out at 1-to-1 and you have, $5 million, $10 million or whatever. and you go to the bank, I don't feel real safe having that kind of money in a bank. Are you going to have any suggestions of where to park that money prior to making some other investment decisions?
Well, you want to move into securities, into real estate, into metals, and all these other things. But you're not going to the bank's not going to let you walk out. You might be able to walk out with a few thousand, maybe $10,000, so you have access immediately, but that money's going to go right into the bank account. They may try to put a 10 or 21-day hold on your money. You can't let them do that either. You have to let them know that up front. They're going to give you the story that, well, that's too much money. We have, that's all about hold. So once the dinar reinstitutes in country, we're going to revisit those issues in a little bit more detail. But worst case scenarios, let's say we do have an RV on March 28th and taxes are due on April 15th. We're going to have, unfortunately, no choice but to pay the ordinary income tax and file for a refund, citing 988E2 and 643A and B. Now, that really sucks, but if it goes south on us and we don't pay the ordinary income, remember, the penalty is 100% penalty. So they could wipe you out with a 100% penalty. So, that's I wouldn't even put it past them to time it to the end of a quarter just to sucker us,
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks for your answers. Sure. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Okay, our next caller. Wow, I got it popping in here. Just a second. Give me a second, folks. I got so many calls, and I got to write down who I've already spoken to so I don't hit them again. Let's see. Okay, our next caller here is area code 443. That's area code 443. Go ahead.
Yep. Hi, Jim. This is Regina from Maryland.
Hi,
I've been,
Regina.
I'm all right. Thank you so much for what you do. I get a lesson every week. I've been back and forth with you via text and email regarding the EIN number.
Yes.
So my current EIN number for my family asset trust was established in 2021, and it reflects me as the trustee on that document that, comes from the IRS site.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? Is that problematic?
You can do one of two things. I would suggest you do both, actually. I would suggest you attempt to contact them by email, because you'll be on the phone for days, and explain what you did, and just ask them if that EIN number will suffice. The other thing you should also do is create sort of like an addendum and explaining all the parties what you've changed, and have them all sign and notarize that document. So when you go in, you will have your original EIN number, you have the trust, and which allows you to make these changes, and you just show them where it's the same trust, it's the same name, it's the same EIN. We've had little musical chairs within the trust, but all of the parties, fiduciaries, were in agreement, and here's our notarized document to establish the changes we made. They're all in agreement. We all signed off on it.
So even though my trust documents themselves reflect a relative, because that document that came from the IRS reflects me, you think I should my tax professional has also suggested that I just draft a letter and send it to the IRS.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Ask
do both.
to change it. Okay.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Do both. Send a letter to them, or I said email. Send it to them, telling them what you've done, and then making the change on the EIN certificate from their end. But also document that in your own document, and everyone sign off on it and get it notarized, so there's no confusion about what you've done.
Okay.
In other words, you don't want to get screwed on this deal because of some technical issue with them.
Exactly.
Right. So that's what you do with both. Contact them and create your own document. Okay?
Yep. Thank you.
Certainly. Bye-bye. Our next caller is, good grief, 509. That's 509. Go ahead.
Hello, Jim. This is Art in the vicinity of Spokane, Washington State.
Yes, sir.
I know you're like a rat. I know you're like a rat in a rain barrel, but for lack of better words. But if you have a trust that is with another company, it's the same name, but a different address. We have the first one is a post office box. We have this one with you as our home address. Will there be any difficulty getting a new EIN number for that new existing trust?
If it's just a matter with the address, just tell them you've got to change it. I mean, that's ridiculous. You should change the address. It happens all the time. Now, a good idea is to email or send a letter to them saying the trust, such and such trust, such and such person is the settler, such and such person is the trustee. Please be advised we've changed the address, and that's, have a copy of that transfer, whether it's email or letter, attach it to your EIN, and that should be more than sufficient. Change of address, it's just it's a ridiculous thing for anyone to even bring up.
Okay, well, so the EIN number for the old trust that is still intact would remain the same. It would just come over to the new trust that is with you.
If the name of the trust is exactly the same, then you're okay. If the name of the trust is different at all, because if you go to apply for an EIN number, they're going to say, well, you can't get it because there's a trust out there with that same name. Yeah, it's your trust. So all you need to do is send them notification and make a special copy of yourself for any change to the trust, but you're utilizing the same EIN number.
Okay. I had a fat finger at the beginning of your call. Apparently, wasn't able to get on until much later. Can you kind of wrap up one over the world as far as what's going on over in Iraq?
Well, basically what I said was everything's moving forward. The Parliament is moving forward with the budget. The CBI is moving forward with the monetary reforms. The dinar is going to go into the Arab Monetary Fund basket. The Iraqi banks are joining both SWIFT and Buna, and so they could justify transacting with a program rate and incrementally increasing the dinar in country. But in order to transact globally, they're going to have to get a new exchange rate, and probably, in my opinion, minimum slight premium over the U.S. dollar, quickly moving to the 322 and higher than that. So basically, I said the reinstitution, which is when the clock's ticking on the reval, could literally happen at any time, in my opinion.
Okay. Do you have any insight on the other currencies that are supposedly in this basket?
The only thing I can say is I like the dong. The dong's been in program rate for a long time. There's a reason that's been the case, but I think that not even the revaluation, I think the reinstitution of the dinar is going to be the catalyst for these other currencies to start moving up real quickly, most particularly the dong.
Okay.
All right.
That's what I presumed as well. Thank you kindly, sir. Appreciate it.
Okay. Sure, Art. Bye-bye. Okay, Art. I got to write down these numbers here. Just give me a second. Let's see. Let's go to area code 405. That's 405. Go ahead. Hello?
Hello, Jim. This is Doug. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I sure can.
Very good. Wow. I was taking notes today, and after I got through the second page, my head was spinning, especially about the history. And
well, now you know
if
why
anybody
I couldn't possibly remember all that.
Especially if anybody's ever visited the grassy knoll down in Dallas, you can tell that everything that was the opinion about what happened is absolutely ludicrous. But that's another subject. This week I had a lengthy conversation with a longtime friend who's held dinars almost as long as I have, and has a very skeptical perspective on anything that I tell him, especially about the trust. So I don't try to help him make a decision anymore about this. The common misconception, I think, by a lot of people is that you have these dinars, you've had them in your possession for a long time, it revalues in country, it goes to the Forex, and at your leisure, you go to the bank and you cash in or trade in some X number of dinars. Let's say you have 20 million dinars and you determine that you want to change in just 1 million at a time. Their insistence is that 1 million dinar exchange, which let's say it's at $3, will garner you $3 million in U.S. currency. That's the only money that you owe the tax on. And I've tried to tell him, by virtue of the education that I've gotten from you, is that's not the case. And so, from that point, talking further about it with him is just fruitless. So, go ahead.
I would say this. With regard to the trust, you can explain to someone why they might want to look into it. If they don't want to, just leave them alone. I mean, that's fine. Now, with the issue of the taxation, that's not an opinion issue. This is a straight-up fact. All you have to do is go to the last sentence in 988E2 of the Internal Revenue Code, which says, if the profit that you would realize from the exchange exceeds $200, you must pay the tax. So anyone that disregards that is not only going to be due the tax, they're going to be due 100% penalty on failure to pay the tax. So if you have 10 million dinar and you exchange 1 million and you pay the tax on it, and you don't pay the tax on the other 9 million on the theory that I didn't exchange it, you might as well kiss it goodbye because it's gone. Because you're going to have to pay the tax, which might be an ordinary income tax, plus 100% penalty. What's the tax?
Go ahead.
39.
That's the point I was telling him over and over again, but he insists that that's not true. But from that perspective, I want to go through the timeline on a reval, the Forex, and the end of a quarter. Let's take, for example, this first quarter. Let's just say that it revalued in country someplace in early January, and we knew that it was a 1-to-1. And as we moved through January into, say, early February, all of the things that were needed to be done were done, and it moved to the Forex. And so now we're in February. And now as we come to the end of March, on March 31st, let's just say the Forex was trading the dinar at $4 a dinar, and you have your money in your trust. And at that point, you determine that that's when you're going to exchange it. That's how much the money, I mean, that's the money that the tax is due on. Because if it's a floating rate, go ahead.
Not only that, if you don't exchange it on March 31st and it's worth $4, you have to pay the tax on that. That's the value of it at the end of the quarter, whether you exchanged it or not.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what I thought. And so from that perspective, at some point, you're going to have to make a decision based on your monitoring of the Forex. And if it's a floating number for the value of the dinar, you're just going to have to say, okay, at this point, this is what I'm going to make my decision. This is what I have to be satisfied with. And, it may go up or go down, but from that perspective, if you don't exchange it, you're still going to owe the tax, on it. And I guess the IRS will make the assessment that on March 31st, it was the Forex had a value of this, and this is how much you're going to owe. That's correct. Is that right?
There's two wrinkles to this. The first wrinkle is, let's take your scenario. Let's say it reinstitutes in country at 1-to-1 on March 31st. All right. Well, it's increased in value. Is the tax due on the increase? Because if you have 1 million dinar, you paid $1,000 for it. It reinstituted in country on March 31st. Now you've got $1 million. Isn't the tax due on that? That's an open question. That's another example of something we're going to have to move lickety-split on if it happens. Our argument is that it's a non-functional currency in the United States. It's only a functional currency in country. But you think the IRS is going to side with us? Unlikely. So that's one issue we have to deal with. The other one is the scenario where it's $4. You have 10 million dinar. It's at $4. Well, you don't have to sell or exchange all of the currency if you don't want to. If you think it's going to still go up, you only need to exchange enough to pay the tax. But then if the remaining dinar continue to go up in value, then you'll have to pay a tax on that gain as well when you exchange the rest of it.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. So let's say, for example, and I know that ordinary income isn't 50%. Let's just say it is for ease of calculation. Say you have 10 million dinar, it goes in at 40 million, and you would have to exchange enough to pay a $20 million tax at a 50%.
Yeah. You'd have to exchange
yes.
half. Correct.
Right.
But let me tell you something about the Kuwaiti dinar. That's what a lot of people did with the Kuwaiti dinar, because the Kuwaiti dinar went, if I can remember, because I didn't have a lot of money in it. That was my first rodeo. I got in and out. I figured I had a hell of a day at the office. I bought it at 15 and sold it at like 346 4 months later. So, but a lot of people were buying at 4, 5, 6, and I believe 7. So you buy Kuwaiti dinar, and 3 weeks later it was down to 360, which was a hell of a return if you bought it at 15. But you just died if you bought it at 7 or 8, and it's now 360. That happened to a lot of people.
Well, I remember I researched it. I think the highest that it went was $7.23.
Yeah,
and
it
then
was like
crashed.
7 or 8. I knew it was somewhere in there, but
Yeah.
I was already off to the races. I'd forgotten all about it. I was still thrilled with my little payday, which was absolutely nothing compared to this.
Well, the best thing, from the perspective of the taxation, our best hope is that, if we have to pay long-term cap gains tax, we exchange enough of the dinars to pay the 20%, which that's what the long-term tax gain rate is right now. We pay the 20%, and then we can still monitor the value of the dinar if we go past the end of a quarter. But that's a Go ahead.
Well, there's one other scenario, and that's why we don't, I always say don't know a day, don't know a rate, don't know the terms. We could go to the bank, and they could withhold at the bank. So, there's a lot of things we don't know yet. There's a lot of things we don't know yet.
Oh, that they would automatically hold the money. Yeah.
Yeah, and they also might allow the banks to annuitize, not give you all the money. So, that's why when the thing reinstitutes and it's a functional currency, then we're going to try to go to the banks and find out what the hell's going on. And unfortunately, the average person at the bank won't know what I'm talking about. So they'll have to kick me up. It might take a couple of weeks to get a straight answer, and by then that could be antiquated.
Right. Well, what authority would they have to tell the banks to annuitize your payout? That seems. That's
probably little or none, but if you've been paying attention in the last couple of years, the executive branch is doing all kinds of things that they can do to see if it'll fly. Right now, in fact, the Supreme Court right now is hearing the case on the loan forgiveness.
Right.
They don't like the Constitution, so their objective is to chip away, because they know if they can amend or repeal any of the Bill of Rights, it all falls away. So, they're not going to give up. So that's why we have to protect ourselves from them.
I understand. Well, I've taken up a lot of your time. I could talk quite a bit longer, but there's others on the line, I'm sure. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Sure. Okay, you take care. Bye-bye now. Okay, let's see who's next on the list here. 813, let's see. Okay, how about area code 785? That's 785. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jim, thanks for all you do. Can
Sure.
you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
My concerns are this. Going back, and I appreciate all of your education that you've given us about the central bank and going way back. So they gained the control over us by establishing the central banks and they even went into the president's home and confiscated all of his stuff. So my question is, regardless of whether we have a trust or not, do you ever worry about them taking this opportunity away from us somehow, because they can do it, because they have control over us?
Biden could theoretically rescind Executive Order 13303, George Bush's order, which allowed individuals, as opposed to central banks, hedge funds, and brokerage firms to purchase currencies. They allowed the individual to purchase the currency direct. I guess he could attempt that. The reason I don't think he would do that is because there are just too many Democrats that are dinarians.
Right.
I don't see that happening. And, then what it would mean is that it was the federal government that allowed it. So they, it's almost as though they're acknowledging they committed a criminal offense by saying, well, no, you can't do that. Well, you said we could do it, So I don't see that happening.
Well,
I know what you mean. Believe me, it's crossed my mind.
Yeah, I'm hoping that they think that we're stupid out here. So if they go ahead and allow us, they trample on the Constitution daily. The Constitution is
they try
trampled on them every day. So I'm thinking, well, if they can do that to the Constitution, they can do anything to keep us from having this. But I'm thinking, well, like you say, all of them have this currency and they got a cash. It would make it blatantly crooked for them to be able to do it and not us. So I'm hoping that they think, well, we're stupid enough to not be able to have a trust and protect ourselves like they do, and we go ahead and end up getting the crap taxed out of us.
Well, the one silver thread in this black cloud is that the Supreme Court, in my opinion, rightfully has beaten the Biden administration like a rented mule for 2 years. They have lost big time. 2 cases, 9-0. And I predict they're going to lose this one. Worst case scenario, 5-4. Best case scenario, 7-2. The president can't just unilaterally forgive loans for a class of individuals any more than they can go in there and say all the farmers that purchased a John Deere tractor don't have to pay the loan. He just can't, he can't do it. So I don't see, I don't see in my wildest dreams how the Supreme Court isn't, going to just kick this thing to the curb like everything else.
The last question that I have is on the digital currency. How is that going to play out? What can we do, or can Congress stop this from happening? How do we keep that from happening?
Potentially, the Congress could stop it from happening. However, the thing we can do is just I'll give you another example. We always hear during the Depression how many millionaires lost everything. That's because they had the majority of their money in the market. The truth of the matter is more millionaires were made during the Depression because people that had tangible assets made a fortune. Now, I'm not saying you're going to make a fortune by transitioning to tangible assets, but I am saying you're substantially limiting the control that a central digital currency would have over your life, your affairs, and your state if your assets are in, if your wealth is in tangible assets. One example I like to use is something called a REIT, a real estate investment trust. It works like a mutual fund. A mutual fund is a company that has a portfolio of stocks and bonds. A real estate investment trust is a portfolio of real estate holdings. So The money is in real estate. Now, the dividends that it kicks out to you, and it's a nice, healthy dividend, would be exposed, obviously, to the digital currency, but the principal would not. So this is a way we can avoid it. Now, there's other things we can do. If you have our trust, you can link up with offshore accounts. We can even move out of the SWIFT system if we need to get really exotic. And for people that have a lot of currency, that's not beyond the realm of possibility. So there are a lot of things we can do, but everyone should, A, establish a trust, and B, transition to tangible assets, income-producing tangible assets. You can also purchase precious metals, industrial metals. Another way you can do it is, if I put my money in, say, gold and silver, it produces nothing. Well, you know what you can invest in? You can invest in mining shares of companies. Of course, that is in the market, but the mining shares track gold and silver, so it'll increase in value. It's liquid. It kicks out a dividend as well. So there are things we can do. We just got to get creative because they're trying to take it from us.
All right, Jim. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Certainly. Bye-bye now. Okay, I'm trying to figure out who I haven't spoken to here. 405. All right. Okay, Hal, let's see. Well, I think there's only one caller left here. I think I've gotten to everyone. Last caller here is 312.
Hey, Jim. That's me.
Hey, how you doing there, guy?
Man, I'm all right. This is Les in Chicago. Hello, everybody.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Jim.
I see how your elections are going there. It looks like you're down one mayor.
Yeah, we're down one mayor, and who knows, we'll be up another crook later.
I was going to say, there's two ways you can go here. You can get a little better and get a little worse.
Yes, indeed. Oh, my goodness. These elections.
Right.
Crooked is all I can say.
Don't get me started. I've already done enough on this call.
Yeah. Well, all of the callers that preceded me have taken my questions out. I'll just say hi, and I'll congratulate you on your explanations prior to taking the call. The people with the questions, the Q&A.
Right.
Because you reminded me so much of the professor when you were giving those lessons. So.
Well, that's a compliment.
That is a compliment. Yes, indeed.
Take care.
Thanks again. And all right. Do likewise. Say hi to the professor.
Will do. Bye-bye. Well, that was our last caller for today. Again, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this call. If you like the things you've heard and you're a new caller, I strongly hope that you will subscribe to us, tell your friends about our calls. You can contact us again if you'd like to get our initial no-obligation package. It does contain everything you need if you wish to proceed. You can go to our email, which is trusts with an S, unlimited LLC. Trusts with an S, unlimited LLC at gmail.com, or our phone service 307-274-4122. We'll be happy to send you our initial no-obligation package. You can review it, apply for the trust if you wish to proceed. If you have any questions, you can contact us. We'll be happy to assist you. Our next call will be next Wednesday. Certainly, if something of a dramatic nature were to happen between now and then, we'll try to get out an emergency email and schedule an emergency conference call. But failing that, we'll be back next Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Thanks so very much for listening, everyone, and have a great week. Bye-bye.